a rich man's world. I have turned the soul of this beautiful land, but that beauty a rich man's world. I have turned the soul of this beautiful land, but
Hello to everyone out there listening to this episode of Red Lens, a political photography podcast. I'm really looking forward to the conversation with today's guest, who I've known since the late 1980s when we were punk scene pen pals and then lived together in an activist group house in the DC punk scene. We hadn't seen each other for a long time, almost 30 years, I think, until we reconnected earlier this year, and now I'm really excited to share this more in-depth conversation. I really appreciate you taking time with me for this episode of Red Lens to talk about music, politics, and most of all, your photography, which you've been doing for more than 3 decades. So welcome to Red Lens Podcast, Pat Graham.
Thank you. Welcome. I'm really excited to be here, Brad. I just mutual respect for what you're doing, what you continue to do, what you did in the past, and you're a little bit of a part of where I am today. So I'll tell you more about that as well.
Awesome. So let's just start out with maybe a little bit about you for our listeners that may not know who you are. Who is Pat Graham?
I'm a photographer, artist, educator. Grew up in the Midwest, born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, grew up around Waukesha. Lover of music, lover of photography. I was in high school, discovered I could combine both of them by photographing musicians live. And I was moved mentally, physically, literally to Washington, D.C. I moved to Washington, D.C. when I was just out of high school, mainly just to photograph. I was really inspired by the musicians and the political scene and what was happening in Washington, D.C. And I'd been out there for an animal rights march, and I had stayed at a place called Positive Force House, which is an activist house. And I met a lot of really inspiring people who initially, really were supportive of what I was trying to do or want to do. And then I moved to Washington, D.C. and photographed musicians and protests and just things that I was interested in and still am interested in. And that led me to kind of falling into doing photography professionally, becoming a photography teacher, educator, and pursuing other things and being around musicians. Toured the world with various couple different groups, done some crazy commercial photography jobs. Yeah, just had a lot of interesting experiences. And yeah, I guess that's who I am.
You touched on a lot of issues that I'm hoping to go more in depth on as we continue the conversation. So we're talking here today because of really all of that you just said, but focusing in first on your photography. Why don't we just start with that? Did you say you first picked up a camera in high school? When did you first pick up a camera? How did you go from that to making it a central part of your life for decades?
Well, I was fortunate that the high school that I went to, they had a photography class, and in that class, we'll show you how old I am. That we didn't have digital, never even could even imagine a digital camera. But part of the photography class was that you would get yourself a Pentax K1000. And take pictures, and then you'd learn how to develop them in the darkroom there at school. And the best part about it was, or one of the great things was, during the class, you have an assignment, they give you the camera, and then you're allowed to go roaming free on and off the campus. And so I did that and took pictures and developed them in the darkroom. And, I have to say, from the moment I enjoyed it, taking the picture, but going into the darkroom and putting your negative in the enlarger and putting it in, developing it in the tray and that red light and seeing the image come up, that was just for me, it was instant. It was magic. It was incredible. And the way that I was seeing things, the way that I was getting good feedback from my teacher and other people around me about what I was doing. So that led me to keep on that path. At the same time, growing up, and at that point, I was always, music was a huge part of who I am. And looking at record covers and the artwork and seeing the performances. And, early on, I can trace it back to, being a little kid and being obsessed with the band Kiss, especially looking at the
Yeah.
photographs on, Kiss Alive and staring at those, and just being so fascinated by that, the live performance, and then seeing pictures of like Jimi Hendrix and just really being captivated by musicians playing music. And I was like, well, that's what I would like to try to do. At the same time, had just discovered punk music. Previous to that, I was really into heavy metal, which was, I saw some groups such as Ozzy and Metallica, Motley Crue, big
Yep.
stadiums. You can't get that close. And then I started going to punk shows and I'm like, wow, I can just walk up to the stage, and started looking at writing punk labels and musicians, and looking at photographers such as Murray Boyles, Cynthia Connelly's work, and Glenn Friedman. And I was like, I want to try to do that, and I can do that. So that's how I started doing it. I started taking pictures at shows in the beginning. Any band that was playing, I was photographing them and then taking them and developing them and hoping to get some results from that. And it went from there. And I kept doing that and obsessively for many different groups. When I first started, I was initially into Minor Threat and that all that music, and then I heard there was a new band called Fugazi, and I was like, "Well, I gotta see them." Took my camera, and I think it might have been probably like the second or third show I ever photographed in Milwaukee of Fugazi, and well, I was just blown away by the performance and the music and what they were doing. I was like, I gotta photograph this, and I barely knew how to use my camera. Of course, most of the pictures didn't turn out, but it just made me want to take more pictures. Fugazi went from there. About a year and a half later, they were supposed to play again, and I wanted to get any opportunity to see them. I'm in the Midwest. Unfortunately, the show was canceled, but it was a good thing because my friends and we decided we were gonna make the show happen. So we got in touch with Discord, and we're gonna set up a Fugazi concert in our town of Waukesha, Wisconsin. And deep down, I was really thinking, I'm setting this up because I want to see them so I can take pictures of them. And that's what happened. It became the show that we set up was kind of funny because in our heads, we're 18, 19, we're thinking, oh, Fugazi, they're huge. Where are they gonna play? So we rented out the local Waukesha Expo Center. This is like, I don't know, 6,000 people. It's a mini dome.
Wow.
Recently, Trump spoke there recently. There's gun shows, dog shows. Yeah, we'll play there. And so we got that place somehow, and then Fugazi showed up, and they look and they're like, what the hell is this? Like an echo chamber, So they went to play, and to make light of the situation, there was a big raffle bin. Ian wrote all the songs on a piece of paper, like the only set list I think they've ever done. Tore them up, threw them in the bin, spun the raffle. Someone from the crowd came up and they were going to choose each song, and then they play the song.
Wow.
Someone comes up there, chooses a song, and guess what? The first song that was chosen was
First song that was chosen. Boy, I don't know.
1989. Yeah, 1990.
Song number one.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't Free Bird by Skinner. It was Waiting Room. So,
Okay.
and they're just like, oh, great. Anyways, it went on from there. But yeah, so that was those two things for me colliding, the photography and the music. That's really where I came from, and that's where I kept pursuing. And early on, photography is a lot more difficult then because you take the pictures, that's fun, but you don't see the results till later after developing them. So it took me a lot longer to learn the technical aspects of it.
I was going to ask about that. Really taking photos at a show, like usually in a dark venue with like, not much light or even like constantly changing light if there's strobes lights and stuff. And I don't know, it's just a very difficult type of photography to learn when you're starting out, right? Like how do you set do settings on the camera to get the people sharp and in focus, not too grainy? Like, how do you use a flash? Like, did you start using flash from the beginning, or?
Yes, I did. To be honest, like from the beginning, it took me a long time to learn, and I'm still learning every day. Full disclosure, I have like dyslexia and ADHD, which is great for being a photographer, but it sucks for numbers and apertures and shutters and understanding all that. So in the beginning, I was just setting what I thought was the right settings. I kind of had an idea, and then for the most part, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work, and I never really understood why, but I kept doing it. But now I look back at the negatives to my old negatives, and I can identify exactly what my problem was and what my settings were, and the problem with why it didn't turn out. So I was using a flash, just put a flash on the camera, fire it off, not really knowing what's happening. I was initially I was really into I really wanted to see what was going on. I wasn't into later what I would discover as like available light or moodiness or I think I was more inspired by like a true documentary, like really see the information, what's happening, and the musicians and people I was photographed or was most interested in, such as Fugazi and other bands. They play in small venues and they're usually they're well lit. As time went on with music photography, as I kept doing it more and more, I would start to go to regular clubs, and then it did get more complicated and became more frustrating, and it took me a long time to kind of figure out how to shoot in those situations.
Hmm.
And we can talk about that, but which is for me as I teach photography now as well. It's one thing that digital has for it that I can really appreciate is that if you want to learn to take photographs, digital is a great way to do that because you can instantly see what's going on. It's not like this mystery of a day, 2 days, getting it developed, go back to it, and then try to figure out what just happened. So, I have at the time, it took me years to figure out what settings I was going to use or how to use. It just took shooting, just took a lot of taking pictures, developing it, going to the darkroom, and there was many different levels. So there was initially I learned how to develop my own film. And that's why I shot mostly, and almost all of that work, a lot of that work is in black and white. It was because of that and because of what I was inspired by was the black and white photography, from people such as like Jim Marshall and other people who were doing black and white, Charles Peterson, Glenn Friedman, and Cynthia Conley. And yeah, their work was in black and white. I'm going to do black and white. I can develop it at home. So that's cool. And then whoops, you make a mistake there, and then that doesn't work. So you get past that. And then I started to understand what a good negative looked like because I had to then print it. So I would start to try to, and then I'm trying to learn how to do a contact sheet, a little mini print from your negatives. And I was
Hmm.
never good at that. I'm still terrible at that. And yeah, I never understood that. To me, it was look at the negatives. I can see this negative has a good density. I'm going to be able to print this thing. I'm going to print it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, a lot of times new photographers struggle, or even long-term photographers struggle to develop their own style or even to understand how to do that. And sort of going off what you were talking about there, as you sort of slowly developed your style, I'd say that really in your most well-known work, or at least the work that I am most familiar with in the 90s, where you were doing black and white concert photography, you did develop a pretty distinct style. And today, looking on Instagram at people doing photos at punk shows, you see a lot of people with a very similar style where you're shooting in black and white, or sometimes people do it now in color, but where you sort of slow down, do a little bit longer exposure, so you get some motion, you get some light trails and a little bit of ghosting, and then you have it in focus when the flash goes off. Like, how did you develop that style, I wonder? Because I don't really remember other people doing that back then. Maybe they
Well,
were and I just didn't see it, but did you sort of stumble on that by accident, or was that something that you just sort of developed slowly over time?
no, I mean, be honest, like the first person that I saw doing that, a couple of people were doing that. I mean, initially, one of the oldest in the history, like music photography, I think of photographer Bob Gruen. Gruen. One of his first famous photographs was this incredible photograph of Tina Turner, and he had done it, and it was like this multiple exposure and had that feeling. So I
Hmm.
saw that. I was really moved by that, understanding that. And then Charles Peterson, who photographed, Nirvana and Mudhoney and the Seattle grunge scene. Yeah, it was his work. He's like the master at what I now know as the slow drag, it's called, or that kind of effect I never even knew it had. There's lots of things that I've done and do that now have names to them, which is kind of good so we can all understand what we're talking about. So we're talking about the slow drag with a slight blur.
Hmm.
And yeah, Charles Pearson, that huge inspiration for me. And I was literally trying to work with that. And the reason I chose that or that look or why it was important to me was because I wanted to show, try to capture the essence of the music of the performance that I was seeing in a still image, without sound. And how could I do that? And it was my favorite performers at the time were not holding still. They were moving. There was like this emotion, expression, and the music was loud and the music is kind of blurry. It sounds blurry and it's moving around. So I was like, this thing that Charles Peterson is doing is perfect for this effect. He's obviously knows technically how he was doing it. So me and this friend of mine who he was in other bands in Milwaukee area. His name was Bill Couture. He was in a band called Alligator Gun, and some of the groups are well known around the Midwest. But we had the photo class in college, and we were trying to get this effect. We're like, how does he do that? And we had to, you had to go take the pictures, and we figured out it's kind of like painting with light, so it's a long exposure, and you gotta pop the flash off. So we were trying to do it, and then it was frustrating as you go to a gig and you see this amazing performance. You're taking on like that incredible jump in the air. Look at this, look at that. Snap, snap, snap. Oh, that's such a cool shot. And someone says, "Did you get the shot?" And like, I don't know. I have to go develop. I hate that question. I go to develop it, and usually I would have not gotten the shot, and then I would just drive me insane because I'm like, I knew it's in my head, this incredible thing, and I didn't get it. Anyhow, both of us back and forth trying to get this thing. And then finally we got it. And it was like, okay, so it's a long exposure, longer shutter speed, and the flash goes off and it all works out. Which at the time I had a feeling and I knew how it worked. And the way that I did it, so to get that effect, that blur that we're talking about, which we'll call the shutter drag, long shutter drag, you need ambient light. You need light from the room that is working with you, and the subject needs to be wearing the right clothes. So you're going to get a reflection, some motion, and then you need to pop the flash off. So you're combining your flash with the room light and the flash, just freezing it. I didn't really know that at the time, but I just knew it looked cool. So it was working for the most part, and it worked on a lot of things. And then as technology and cameras advanced, there became a thing called the slow sync or rear curtain sync, which is essentially the flash goes off at the end of the exposure. So you get the
Yep.
blur in the right area. It's not behind or, it's not a reverse. And that was something that came later, but this is really kind of funny. The way that I got my technique or the way that I was doing this, I literally, well, my friend, we also figured out we needed wide angle lenses. Like, oh yeah,
Hmm.
how come it's not working? Oh, the wide angle lens. Oh, fish. We didn't know the term fish.
Yeah.
And so we got the wide angle zooms. That was cool. And then I just ended up, I was like, okay, I gotta bounce the flash around. So I took my flash and I would tape a piece of card to spread the light. And then on the back of all flashes, there's a button that says test. And you push it and it fires your flash off.
Yep.
So my method was that I would put my camera literally on my shutter speed. I'd set the camera on B for bulb, which we know means the shutter stays open. And then I would set my aperture, which I finally figured out that a small aperture opening, which is like, say, f22 being the smallest, f16 about the mid range. And this is confusing because what the hell? Those are large numbers compared to 2.8. So I was like, what the fuck? Anyway, so I got that my aperture because and I did that because that would solve the focusing issue. It was
Right.
manual focus. Everything should be in focus. I just need to fire the flash. So camera and B focus maybe once in the beginning of the show, generally in one particular area, check it again. Essentially, and I would hold the flash in my left hand with my finger on the button that said test, and then the camera in my right hand with my finger on the shutter and push, waiting. So if I sense something's going to happen, I push the shutter button and the camera's just in B, shutter's open. But then I
Hmm.
have to think again, okay, when is the moment? And then I hit the flash with my other hand. So fire the flash off when I think the moment is happening, and then that's how we get the effect. But looking back at it now, it's kind of ridiculous because it was kind of like taking two pictures. It was, the camera and the flash were not hooked up. And eventually I realized I could hook them up and all of that. But the technique worked pretty well.
I do remember seeing you at shows with, yeah, the camera in one hand and the flash in the other hand. And I didn't remember. I guess I assumed that you must have had them connected, but now
No,
that you explained that, you just had it on bulb and hit the test thing. That's great. That's funny. I didn't realize that's how you were doing it.
yeah.
How long were your exposures usually? Like if you had it on bulb, you can have sort of as long as you want. Were you doing like a second, 5 seconds? Like,
Usually it would be about a second or less. So I wouldn't sit there and just wait, but I would, try to get close. And, this would also a lot of these bands that I love to photograph, I became obsessed with photographing. So I would know their music so well. I would know, okay, this is building. There's going to be somebody's going to fall over, or jump up in the air, and I would wait and then take that photograph. So it was never too long. So this is the thing that was happening as well. Because if you do that for too long, then you're going to get a complete overexposure because there's too much light getting into your camera.
hmm
And I found later, as when we living in Washington, D.C., at one point, all of the gigs, the shows were happening at churches. They were happening at alternative spaces that were not lit by concert lighting. And that was ideal. Like for me, the fluorescent light, ideal for that situation. However, spotlight's not really ideal. And also, if it's too bright and you do that, you're going to get an overexposure. So it was just kind of like feeling my way through. And when it worked, it was incredible, but many times it didn't work, and it was really frustrating because you get through negatives back, and it's just like, oh my God, it just didn't work
hmm
because you could see if it was going to work or not. Yeah, most people, if I really, I didn't have access to YouTube and all of that, so I had to try to figure it out on my own. I remember asking my photography teacher, how is this effect happening? How are they doing this? And they're like, well, you gotta do this, that, and the other thing. I'm like, what the hell is that? So
Yeah.
yeah, it went from there. I completely, I've been teaching photography now for years, and with digital, I know how it works. At that point, I reached a point where I had a key setting that would generally work, which would be an ISO of 800, for color, around 620, set the camera, and then put the camera on f8, and the shutter speed's an eighth of a second, and then that would give me pretty good results. But
Okay.
yeah,
So yeah, it strikes me that many of your famous images from that time were created, and you've made reference to this at more independent, small DIY shows where you can get right up against the stage. You're literally right in the middle of the action with the band and the crowd. There's no physical barrier or security guards between the band and the crowd, no restrictions on photography like there are at a lot of venues now. But you've also done photography in those some of those larger, more arena type settings or more like corporate kind of shows.
yeah,
I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the differences.
yeah. Well, there there are a lot of differences. I guess my best advice to photographers just starting out. So when I give people advice when I'm teaching or advising on photography, I'm basing this advice on my own experience and the way that I treated things. And initially, I wouldn't I would only photograph at small places because I wanted to be close. I'm like, what's the point? This place is too huge. I can't get up there. This is ridiculous. I wouldn't even try. And then also, my mindset was like every photograph has to be taken with a wide angle lens. I can't do anything. It's got to be full frame. There's no cropping. I read some history book about Henri Cartier-Bresson and the full crop, black border, and I was really restrictive of myself. But then finally, what I'm getting to is that I let go of that when I was kind of forced and you get in situations where you're being paid for photographs and you realize that you can't give the result. So like, say you're photographing a band in a stadium or someplace huge.
Hmm.
The wide angle, not going to really cut it, might a little bit, but not really. And then, so you're restricted. So you have to look at it in other ways. And the way that I would do that or still do that is I would look, looking at photographs of situations like that, like what photographs do I like, or what do I like about how can I achieve that look within my own photograph? So that could mean, I'm trying to tell a story about this concert. Say we're just talking about concerts only now. So how do I
Hmm.
do that? Maybe I need to get up close. I need to think about this in a different way. So I would have to use a telephoto lens, or I would have to realize that my access is limited, but I want to show something. So there's more thought that has to go into it. I guess that's the difference. There's thought that should go into if you want a good photo wherever you're going, one needs to really think about that. But it's a different way of shooting and you can't approach it the same way because it's going to be, yeah, a whole different scenario. And in general, music photography has changed a lot since I started doing it and, you started doing it. There's things that are a lot better. There's things that are more annoying now. But yeah, the main difference is you just got when I'm working with it or whoever, you got to be free to really think about what you're doing and how you're going to achieve it. And look at other people. I look at other people's work in the same scenario, like I said, and what can I draw from them, at least technically, like what's the filter I can put on that? So I'm not copying someone, but I am inspired, we're all inspired by different things. So
Hmm.
yeah, main difference is yeah, access and getting something that is going to be interesting because that's the other challenge now with photography today. One great thing is that it's easy. We can see what's going on. We can learn quicker because it's digital, but so can everybody else. And everyone has kind of realized that photography is so much fun to do. Like, that's why you see like 50 photographers in the front. That's why it's limited, because everyone wants to do it. And that's fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, at any concert you go to, whether it's a DIY show in a basement or a church, or whether it's Kiss Alive type, state arena show, everyone has their phone out at some point taking either
Mhm.
video or images. So like that's a question I have in this digital era where we're literally drowning in images. I saw some statistic of how many photos are taken every year and just how exponentially it's gone up from obviously from the film era, but even every year, year after year, it keeps going up and up. And with that, we're just drowning in images on social media. And now with AI kind of coming into the picture, making it harder to tell sometimes what's even real.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's important to keep taking photos?
Well, it's shifting. Yeah, my outlook. It's a question that needs to be asked all the time, I believe. I mean, at this moment, from my own perspective, what keeps me going, taking pictures, is really thinking about the process, why I'm taking it, when I'm taking, or as a lot of people say, making a picture, taking a picture, depending on how you want to think about the language of photography. But it's moving, as far as I can tell, the process, there is still an element of, things need to be documented in that way. And it's important because the still image has always been so powerful, and that continues to this day. And the way that I would look at that is if we look at the history of photography, so thinking about, like the history, and this is a thing that is a problem, I think, with the amount of photographs. So there's there's a challenge now, which is, as you said, there's millions of photos being taken and people are scrolling and flipping through. It's still important, but like if we look at the Vietnam War, and like what was something that cause people to realize, hey, wait a second, this is wrong. We should change this. It's that famous photograph of the general about assassinating that guy, and that was a still image. Also, that image was filmed. There was a video of that. It was shown on the ABC News that night. Millions of people saw it, but it also went in as a picture in newspapers and is still image around. If you ask anyone about that, they're not going to say, "Yeah, I remember that on the news when I saw that." They're not going to say that. They're going to say, "Yeah, I remember that photograph.
Mm.
That's a still image," and that's what we have now, and people remember that. But the frustrating thing for me is the challenging thing is now it's somehow becoming less powerful because the current situation now, we're seeing all these horrendous photographs and horrendous moving images, but somehow it's not shifting. So I don't know. It's still important. It needs to be there. And the challenge is now with the AI. The challenge is with everything. Yeah. And I would hope if I look at positive light on this, it would cause people to try to hopefully start to think about things in more of a critical way and question everything. And really, like, you see a photograph, like, okay, it could be fake. Well, let me look into this. What really happened? What are people saying on both sides? So you approach it in that way. The other thing about photography, I think what is still important and its evolution, which people, I don't, they talk about a little bit. I'm thinking more about this is photography is important for the person making the pictures because, all these people at the concerts, everyone taking pictures on their phones and they're out taking pictures of this and that and the other thing. When it comes down to it, what I'm doing, I don't know how you feel about this, but I just love the process. I'm gonna go take pictures of cheesy things, not show it to anybody, but it's just fun, It's something to focus on and to do. You could take it as meditation. You could look at it as, everything is terrible around me, but I can take a walk and try to photograph 6 different types of mushrooms I see in the grass. And
Yeah.
that's like one moment that is just, so that I think is very important. And it's also, it allows people an outlet. I don't think a lot of people even realize that's what they're doing, but that's what I think is important.
Yeah, I can really relate to that. I mean, when I think about when I started taking photos at concerts, part of it is I don't like being somewhere and not knowing what to do or not having something to do. It gave me a focus, to,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to go to this show. And similarly, like when I did a zine in high school, and I would go to a show and enjoy the show, but also give me a reason to like go up and talk to people because I was very shy. And so I would never have interacted with anyone going to shows or protests, for that matter too, if I didn't have like a reason to go up and talk to someone. Hey, can I interview for you for my zine, or like taking photos of this band and then sharing them with them afterwards.
Exactly. Yeah.
I really agree with that. Part of what you said, that it really, in some ways, is about the photographer. Doing it is you're doing it for yourself, or at least that was true for me. Yeah, I was gonna say the image you mentioned from Vietnam, like you can think of more recently. I try to think about that. Like, is there still something equivalent to that happens now? And I thought of two recent examples. One, there was a ship of migrants trying to get to Greece, a few years ago from somewhere in Africa. I don't remember where, or no, it was from Syria, I believe. And there was an image of like a father and a child sort of face down, drowned, on the coast of a Greek island that went viral and just really exemplified so much of what is going on politically and socially and just on a bare human level that I think really had an impact. And then there was also, I don't know, a couple of years ago, Haitian migrants coming across the Rio Grande in Texas, and then there was like Border Patrol agents that, had like what looked like they were like whipping them and as they were trying to cross to get them to stop. And that really also kind of exemplified that whole bringing the human aspect back to this whole abstract immigration debate under like Trump and even the Democrats too, sort of where you've all the debate about it loses sight of the actual humans who are risking their lives to try to, give themselves a little better shot at life. And this is the brutality they face. So I think it is
Exactly.
still possible.
It's important. It's like, yeah, the same thing is happening in the UK. And yeah, it is this, these are people like us in all these different situations. And for me, for a lot of people at the moment, the sad thing is that images, they're becoming almost even, people are becoming numb to them. That said, these are historical things that are very important. So we can go back to that and look at that. But coming back to this point, so that and that level extremely important, and we can all think of these images and how they become viral and what happens. There was the picture called Molotov Man, taken by Susan Meiselas in Nicaragua. That was the guy holding the Coke bottle, Molotov cocktail. Look that up. There's like all these really iconic images, and they travel and they change meaning. And that, so in that aspect, it's extremely important. But if we go back to the photography as on the personal level, as the conversation, as what you just said, which I think is great, is yeah, you're shy. Me too, I was shy too. I felt as though I couldn't play music. I loved it, but how could I get involved? So I could photograph my love, I could document it, and on that level, I'm with the musicians. And literally most of my friends are musicians. I've traveled all over the world. I've, done projects on instruments. I know so much about it, but I don't play. People are, you play? I'm like, no, I don't play. Maybe I should, but I, I'm the document. I'm the observation. I can bond on that level, and it's a conversation. And then looking back at my older work, it's the same. It's a similar thing. And I've seen there's other photographers that'll do this from their, different subcultures. The one, there's a Latino ex feed. I can't think of her name. I'll think of it in a second. But using photography as an outlet, a way to create conversation and dialogue about things. So that's for someone to say, oh, we can talk about this, or look at this happened, or this thing, or that thing, and it's a connection. You and I connected. We connected in photography way back when we first met. Really, if you think about it,
Yeah.
there's a picture. I saw this old picture of us. I think this Hoover gig, and like you've got your camera, I got my camera. I gotta find this. I found one of the letters that you wrote to me after I first met you. You're saying with pen pals, I had it, and we were talking about that, talking about then. So yeah, that's photography still does that. Maybe it even does that more now. So that's a great thing about it.
Again, there's so many threads I want to follow up on, but I'll since we're kind of touching on politics a little bit in the last little part we were talking about, that is kind of part of the focus of this podcast, right? Where I try and talk about the
Yeah,
politics of photography, photographing movements, political activism, etc. And as we talked about before, when we lived together in DC, and it was in the context of living in like the Positive Force DC group house and other sort of activist spaces in DC. With it, Positive Force did benefit concerts as well as protests and volunteer work. And in addition to taking pictures at concerts and stuff, you were really in a very politicized environment back then as well. Like that was when the Riot Girl movement emerged in DC, was a big center of that, and we were sort of in the midst of all that. So there's one particular image I really remember, maybe because you shared it somewhat recently on Instagram or something, where it was a picture at a protest. I believe a bunch of people from Riot Girl at a protest in front of the Supreme Court, I think, for abortion rights. And I don't know. I'm just curious to hear you talk a little bit more, if you want to talk about that photo or that moment specifically, or maybe just more generally, like protest photography or movement photography you've done over the years, like, and what's your approach to it? And yeah, love to hear about it.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Again with that, it was a similar thing with protest photography and music photography. For me, it's like the important part of it, or one of many, but the way that I look at it is it's this documentation. It's documenting what I was seeing in front of me and what was happening. and trying to get that feeling, but also get all the information, you know? So there's all this, when a protest is happening or a band playing, there's a lot going on in front of you. And there's just like, you know, screaming, yelling, sounds, all of these things going on. And, you know, you want to try or, you know, I want to try to capture that all, but get that across so people can think about it. So, you know, is it, if it's at a place such as the Supreme Court or some kind of iconic building or something that people recognize, then that's important place. And then obviously the message or what you're protesting is important, but the emotion and the feelings that are being expressed are really important. So ideally, all of those things align in a photograph and you can kind of express that. Early on, yeah, with the work or the photography I was doing of Riot Girl or various protests in Washington, D.C. in the beginning, these were things that I was a part of as well. I wasn't just wandering around thinking, oh, look, there's some funny protesters. I'm going to take their picture, you know? And that's unfortunately now that happens a lot. And one has to approach these situations with respect and kind of understanding and realizing that, you know, well, these people be protesting. Maybe they don't want some person that they don't know shoving a camera in their face. You know, maybe they don't. Maybe they do. Maybe they want to be hidden. So, you know, these are all things one needs to think about. I thought about then, and I still think about now. And I've had people occasionally like, you know, don't take my picture. Fine, fair enough. I won't take your picture. You know, and try to respect that. But also, I think it's important not to, as a photographer in any of these scenes, like, being not taking away from what is happening. Like I'm not the thing that I want people should look at, be it a band or whoever. So that's getting more difficult now because everyone's taking pictures. So that's
Mm.
something you need to think about as well. But you know, back then it was my friends and I don't know. I mean, it's funny. I was really inspired. Part of the reason I think I probably ended up in DC, I know I did, was well, photography. The particular was what's that comp, the State of the Union, you know, that Positive Force does at it. Yeah. Like
Yep.
there's photographs on that, and then these photographs in band in DC of the punk percussion protests and people lined up in front of the South African embassy banging on drums, and like that was just really inspiring. And for me, the thought of like, oh, I could be out there photographing, it could be a part of this, and also taking photographs that maybe are similar or doing the same thing, because those photographs, that music, that moved me. So that was why I was out there and I wanted to do it.
Mm.
If I have any regrets about those protest photographs now, it's I wish I would have taken more. I wish I would have thought about it more as to how I was doing or what I was doing instead of just kind of reacting to it and
Hmm.
also being a little bit shy because I didn't take the way I used to photograph with film. I would not take that many. I had to really see something that I wanted to document that was important, and I also did not want to take away or I didn't want to be seen, which was, you know, there was things that restricted me that were, I think, are important, but at the same time, I maybe missed out on things because I was too restricted, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely feel the same way. Like I've never regretted a photograph I took. I've regretted lots of times that I didn't take photos, and
Mm.
at the same time having that same feeling as you is that I don't want to put myself in the middle of something in a way that takes away from what's going on. So that gives me hesitation sometimes too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to transition just a little bit into asking about photography projects. You know, it's something that a lot of photographers do. It's something that's been very helpful for me to improve my photography and focus my photography is just to think up a project to do. And so I did one of the first ones I did as I was trying to get more serious about photography in recent years was I did a 365 project where I basically took and posted a photo, at least one photo every day. And then I made a little book for myself out of it at the end. And I just tried all kinds of stuff I never would have otherwise if I didn't have that project that I was sort of forcing myself to do. And I'm also in the middle of like a 100 strangers project now, which is a lot of fun and has helped to like just get more practice doing portraits, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, I wanted to ask about your photography projects because you've done some very interesting ones. You did a project with Cynthia Connolly, who you mentioned before, of a series of portraits of musicians from DC with their cars. You've done projects that I think have ended up as books, right, where you focus on
Yeah.
instruments of certain musicians. Like, why do you think it's important to do projects? Like, how do you decide what projects to do, and are there any you're working on now?
Yeah, for sure. I think yeah, projects are really important and they're more if you're into photography, I think they're key. As you know, initially these are things that I learned early on, and I wasn't even aware of it, but being self-aware now. So the project with it was musicians with their cars in DC, and those were taken by Cynthia portraits. And then at the same time, this is right before I met Cynthia. I had moved to DC, and I was just going to every gig I could go to and photograph everything. And then Cynthia and I had met and we were became friends. We were bonding over photography, just talking about photography. And I was working at a camera store, and she was had this series that because she was really good at she had projects. She had gone to art school and she was doing projects. This was a project of hers. And so for me, realizing that, I was just kind of aimlessly like, I'm going to move to DC because I love these bands. I'm going to take their pictures. I don't even know. Am I doing a project? I don't know. I just like to go to the show and take pictures. Yeah, I'm not thinking about it. And then looking at her work, I was like, what could I do to do something along these lines? And all of a sudden I realized it's like, wait a second, your photographs, you have portraits of the people that I'm photographing. So we on the stage, it's like this works together. What a great collaboration. So this is another thing is a collaboration and projects.
Hmm.
So we did an exhibition at a friend of mine in Milwaukee called Scott Johnson. He just opened a coffee shop called Fuel Cafe. This is like 1996, I think. We had met through punk zines. He was a writer and all of that early on, same kind of scene. He went on to do a lot of restaurants, but he put on this show by Cynthia and I called DC People with Their Cars on Stage or something like that. Some thing. Cynthia made flyers. And so that's how that came about. And then it evolved because that show, people liked it. It was in a coffee shop. And then someone else said, oh, well, I could put it up in Chicago at this place, or you should put it on here. And then Cynthia, who was also working at Discord, helped with that. And there's this whole underground scene of record stores and venues. And so she pulled that connection and started to incorporate like art and our exhibition into that scene and pretty much organized a tour and sent our photos around the United States and the UK, everywhere. And it was a tour. And, I helped a little bit in the beginning. I helped with the photos, I helped something, but credit to her, she really grabbed so that was a pretty amazing project to do. And it was a collaboration. So learning that early on, like that's really cool. Then how could you do a project, it needs an ending point and you need to move on. Projects also will allow you, as you do the project, tell people now, and these are the things that I've learned that happened to me that I didn't even realize was happening. But the project is a journey, it's this process as you go along. Other things come up and you can take an exit off this project to something else. So I was, obsessed with photographing musicians in Washington, D.C. At one point, I realized I had the same picture of a performer on stage playing guitar like half a dozen different times, different people. I was like, this is getting boring. Like
Yeah.
I was like, there they go again. Okay, jump up in the air, fall down, blurry. Okay, there it is again. Boring. What the hell? What is it about this? What can I do? That's different. And I was really into macro photography. I mean, that's the other dimension was what drew me into photography was World Magazine. When you're a kid, I don't know if you remember that. You order it through school. You can order posters. It was like this book club thing or something. World Magazine. On the back of the magazine, what in the world? Macro photography. What is this? It's so close up. What the fuck is this? I love macro. And then, wait, look at that guitar. It's all cracked. Look at that drum. It's all messed up. I started taking macro photographs of instruments and just for fun, abstracts, and then show them and people, the musicians be like, wow, this is cool. And then that evolved into another project called Instrument,
Hmm.
which is I would photograph, an instrument that was really important to a musician. Much like photographer, we love our cameras, which I saw and experienced. And they love that. And I had fun doing it, and it'd be abstract, and then as that evolved, that was a project I was doing, and I would do one musician and they would love it. And then they would say, oh, well, my friend who's in this band or so and so knows this guy. He's got this amazing amp or guitar or whatever it is. You got to shoot that. And then they would call him and say, yeah, Pat's doing this really cool thing. Let him come over. And then this project just grew organically. And then I had it published as a book, Chronicle Books as my second book. From that book, people in the book, one of the people, well, I had pictures of Ian, Ian Mackay from Fugazi. I did all these pictures of his guitar, and I was sent initially by Guitar World to photograph him, and I was like, I can't photograph Ian for Guitar World, like some cheesy, like, here's Ian McKay with his SG, well, what can I do? So took these abstracts that went in the book, and then people saw that, and I was working with Johnny Marr, who used to be in the Smiths. He was in Modest Mouse at the time, and he's like, I love these photographs. He's really inspired by the pictures of Ian's guitar, and he's like, I was on tour with him, and we were in Nashville, and we're like the Grand Ole Opry. He's like, I want you to photograph my guitar on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, at the Ryman Theater, in that close-up style. And he loved those, and that became the book cover, and then that evolved. And then eventually, I said to him, like, you've got a lot of instruments. I want to do this just for the history, the biography of you. Like, let's tell your story through your instruments. And then he's like, yeah, and of course I could never quite get it together because I'm not great at completing things. And years later, he's finally like, oh, we're going to do this now. Let's do it. So, like last 2 years ago, a year and a half, we went and we did that. And that book came out on Thames and Hudson. It's called Mars Guitars, and I'm super proud of that book and the incredible instruments. And so I did the series with that as well. And then that's a project to fall back on. If something comes up, I'll photograph it. An instrument in that macro way. But again, that's like it kept me focused on doing something different. It's around music. It relates to what I wanted to do. It ticks the boxes. It's also photography. It's close up, and it's like it was an off ramp from the live photography, which is also an off ramp from what else could I do with music? Oh, I'm going to go on the road. I'm going to photograph a band on tour. Ideally, scenario, I get this band and they're not very famous. Then they become very famous, but anyways, you drive across the USA, photograph a band. That'll be cool. I've never been across America. So yeah, Modest Mouse, I did that with them. Lo and behold, they were not famous and they became famous. So it worked out. But anyhow, that's another offshoot of it. It's also photography. It's documentary. It's a story. But the point is, yeah, projects. I love projects. I think there is so much opportunity to learn, as you said, a practice. So I learned a ton, and I continue to learn different things about photography through doing these projects. There's a reason for you're doing what you're doing. There's a conversation you have with other people. You communicate, you interact, and there's so many great things about it. In the end, if you have something, there's so many different levels. You can change things, you can do things, change yourself, something else, whatever. That's why I think they're important. Yeah, it keeps some focus to the work.
I'm glad you brought up Modest Mouse because my understanding is you toured with them multiple times. And if someone didn't know you, they might think like, oh, this was just this professional photographer guy they contracted to go tour with them. But it is interesting the way you sort of laid it out, how following, just photographing people and bands you like, even in little small venues, can lead to going with them as they develop and going into new areas, new things. I don't know. So I am very curious to hear more about your touring with Modest Mouse. You said at first they weren't famous, and I know that we knew Isaac before Modest Mouse was even a thing,
Yeah.
right? And so you sort of followed that journey along with them. I would love to hear,
Yeah.
what is it like being a tour photographer? What, especially as they got bigger, and any, stories you'd feel like sharing?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean that could be a whole podcast, but I'll just briefly, well, the thing with Modest Mouse, me working with them, this goes back to the love of photography, which Isaac and I bonded over initially. We love photography, we love music, the politics of the time. I met him because he moved into the house that we were all living at, which is Positive Force. And then we stayed up to do photos to try to capture that weird, blurry magic photography thing, not on a stage, but it was about the Charles Peterson kind of shutter drag, but in a different way, and it's something that he wanted to do. So, we made a photo zine and we really bonded over that. And he loved the photos I had taken and I liked what he was doing. He was super creative. And this is before he was even playing music. He was playing music a little bit at the time. So anyways, we were just doing wacky things. He was literally had this idea of he would get outfits from thrift stores and dress up and then want me to photograph him in different situations just as kind of an art piece or as kind of a interesting scenario. And that would be at the Positive Force house after everybody went to bed. Or one point he got himself this really nice 1950s kind of one-piece green dress that he had, and then he got some foam and he made himself some angel wings and a halo, and then he wanted me to photograph him at different locations around Arlington. So it would be like, he was about 15 or 16, this boy dressed up like an angel, and then this guy, me, photographing him. We went to 7-Eleven and photographed him there, and Sears and just different spots. So we had fun doing that. It was just really fun. And we were going to do a photo zine. We did a small run of it. Actually, it reminds me, I got to reprint that thing. It was through Kinko's, friends of ours, made some color copies and made a few copies. But so we did that. And then he was playing music and then he moved out, and we always kept in touch because we bonded over photography and music. And he sent me some tapes a couple years later. He's like, yeah, I have this new band called Modest Mouse. The tapes were pictures of him kind of in the style of what we had done, but he had done more other things in the Northwest in his band Modest Mouse. And we had always talked about, I always said, well, if I could photograph you guys on the road, that would be cool to photograph you. So the initial idea was that I would go, they were going on tour, I would meet up with them and tour around and take pictures. And also, I think initially it was like I was going to manage them or whatever that meant at the time, selling merch. It was just me and the three members of Modest Mouse. And in my head, I'm like, I'm going to take pictures. They knew that. And Isaac thought this would be cool because then we can do our wacky kind of weird photos all over the US. We can do this in various locations. And I was like, I can photograph America on the road and through the highs of a band, And so it was a combination of that. And then I got caught up in, I wasn't playing the music with the band, but I was doing everything else with the band, and photography was always my thing. And they were used to that because I was always there with the camera and testing out various types of cameras and hauling cameras around. And then if photographs were needed, I would have them and they'd come to me. And it just, I met more people and it evolved from that point. And there was lots of kind of insane scenarios that we went through in the beginning because we were doing, there was no, you had to get yourself around literally with an atlas and a payphone. So I was documenting that, and we would get lost many times. We would miss gigs, we'd be late, couldn't find it, or whatever happened. Get caught in blizzards overnight, almost crashed the van, all the stuff that people went through at the time. And I have a lot of photographs of that. And as time evolved, each tour we were doing, this is like 1997. Each year I was touring with him once or twice from that point on up to 2001. And every time that we would tour, they would get more popular. Like the venues would get a little bit bigger, more people would show up. And it was like this evolution. And, the last tour from that era that I did with them was 2001. I was on tour when the September 9/11 attacks happened, and that was pretty insane to be on tour at that time. They were actually pretty popular, not huge, but popular. We had my job for that tour was take photographs, kind of informally. I always never like I was directly hired as a photographer. It was like just unwritten, spoken, like, I'm taking photos and they need something for something, I'm there. I was also, they had projections that they were playing behind them. And one of the projections with the gig would start out with is like their friend, this guy did these different films, and it was like footage of things playing, like kids on BMX bikes and all that. But one of the main features of this film that we were projecting was literally buildings blowing up, like just like demolition, like tall buildings. And day two of the tour, Los Angeles, September 12th, 2001. They're supposed to play, and then they canceled play, like I say. But in the blowing up of the buildings, these projections, it also is being reversed. So when they'd be playing and it would go, whoop, then it would come back up, and it was like, and it was just, yeah, it was bizarre because people would be watching it like this is going on. The crowd's like, this band comes out with footage of buildings blowing up behind them. It's just like, and then I was like, yeah, we're about building things up. Or so it's just like some corny thing, but it just happened. But yeah, so that was interesting. And then from that point, I ended up after that, I moved to London. I met my wife through photography. We set up a gallery, and that was another kind of chapter. But anyways, so Modest Mouse became a few years later, then they had a top 40 hit. I wasn't around for that moment. I saw them in the UK, I think, once. And then the follow-up to that was going to be something else. To put a long story, well, not that long story, but shorten it from my point of view, well, they had lost their main guitarist, or they needed a new guitarist. And jokingly, someone said, well, who did our last guitarist rip off? Someone said, oh, Johnny Marr. And Isaac said to our friend Juan, who was a manager at the time, well, yeah, call him up, get him in the band, like, yeah, we're just some indie kid. We'll get Johnny Marr from England to come to our band. They called him up, and Johnny was like, yeah, sure, I'll come over. And he started playing with them. And, so then Johnny recorded with them, and he went on tour. And then just before that tour kicked off, I was trying to put together a book of my work with Isaac and Modest Mouse from that first era. And then Isaac said, I was like, yeah, in my head, I'm thinking, well, now it's my chance. I had the first part, it was like me with the three guys, and I was photographing that literally like in basements, no one's there. And now they're out touring in this huge, they're all popular. And so Isaac said, what job you want to do? Think of something to do. And I said, okay, well, I'll do a daily photo blog, and I'm the photographer. It's like, all right, let's do it. And this is before Instagram. So this is, digital. This is I got my first digital camera for this job, and a Nikon D200. And with me and this other guy, we created a photo blog. So the idea was that I would photograph every day of the tour and give the fans another point of view, write a caption, which is basically like what Instagram became. But this is in the era of photo blogs. So I was doing that early on for Modest Mouse, off and on, from 2007 to 2009. I did that and traveled all over the United States and Canada and Europe, Japan. So at that point, it was myself with the members of the band on one touring bus. And there was also another touring bus, which is just the crew. And then there would be a semi, which is all the lighting, everything. So we've gone from 1997, myself and three people, four people in the van that was breaking down all the time, to 12, 13 people on a bus that's driving us around. And, I'm able to take photographs during the day, come on the bus, edit them, and then upload them through the Wi-Fi on the bus, so it really evolved. It was quite extreme thing. And it all, in that sense, it worked out. So I literally have, here is Modest Mouse on the second day of the first tour I did with them. They're playing, or at fourth, fifth day, Beloit, Wisconsin.
Hmm.
outdoors to six guys who are drinking a 12 pack of Milwaukee's Best and you don't give a shit about Modest Mouse. Here's 10 years, 2097, yeah, like, was it? I don't can't do the math. 10 years, whatever later. Here they are playing in, at the Gorge in Seattle with 30,000 people watching them. So it's like it all photography wise that it worked out. Not always works out. Maybe that's kind of interesting about it. I mean, it was a still story. It was still a thing. So yeah.
I wanted to just talk about this idea, kind of going off of a little bit your time with Modest Mouse, but more in general, right? Like photos taking on more meaning over time. And so here we are in the year 2024, and on your Instagram, you post pictures of shows that happened 30, 35 years ago, and they get hundreds of likes, lots of engagement. Also, there is the reality that in talking about Modest Mouse, one of their members, their drummer, recently passed away, as I understand it, and you just have tons of photos with him over the years, I imagine. And you also recently posted a picture of Steve Albini, who also recently passed away. I don't know. Can you talk about that dynamic a little bit, where images take on more meaning, or even maybe a different meaning over time, and still have resonance, or maybe even have more resonance over time?
Yeah, for sure. I think I mean this is one of the things that people perhaps don't think about when they're making photographs. And photographers, the difference between someone who's like, I'm a photographer, I'm not a photographer. Photographers tend to think about this early on and try to document things. Everything does change, believe it or not. Like a boring picture of the street today in 30 years will not be boring. So it has an impact. And it's the same with, human beings and landscapes. Landscapes, not so much. They can, depending on what they are. But, for example, if you look at, like, if we just like look at a landscape photograph taken by Ansel Adams of the side of a mountain or something, look at
Mhm.
that now. It's like, okay, it's beautiful. It has some meaning, but not as much meaning as if Ansel Adams' family was there and it was a portrait of them with the mountain in the background or his car. Like, what would have
Right.
more meaning to us as people? And it's the same realizing now as a photographer, like as I get older and we all get older and looking back at my work, it does become more important. And but that's just it depends on who, it's important to me and anyone else who's maybe experiencing it or part of it, it will be important to them. It may not mean that much to other people. And I always, I think about the people that I photograph and what I do. I think this was an interview with Ian Mackay from Fugazi, and he was on BBC or something. And he was asked about, he said something along the lines of, you know, some people know about our band, but nobody we're not famous or but the point is the people who do know, it's important to them. And that could be just in my case it could be just the family members of a person, or it could be someone that was moved by what they had done through their music or expressions or whatever. And I thought about that a little in the past, but it's becoming starting to hit home a lot harder now as we get older. And I see it with other photographers and people. And in particular, the work I did with Modest Mouse and Jeremiah Green, who's the drummer of Modest Mouse, who passed away. That still is that's just like, I don't know, it's pretty intense because as a photographer, you're documenting this moment in time. And we look at our photographs, or when you look at your photographs after you've taken the photographs, it's almost like it weirdly freezes things in your head. I don't know if this happens to you, but I could look at a photograph and I know it, or maybe I'm printing it often, or it's just around. I kind of feel like I'm just stuck there, just like that's it. And then I'll talk to someone that was there or experienced something and realize that it doesn't look that way anymore. It's like, so I guess my point is, I spent an intense amount of time with Jeremiah over 10 years, and after that, we kept in touch. But, I didn't have a chunk of time, near before he died or in a certain era. I wasn't there when he was a baby, or whatever. I was there for that period of time in his life we shared together, and that's my experience overall with him. But that's really close. And then the beautiful thing about with him was, well, I photograph things that I love, really. I move by, be it music, a person, a cloud, whatever. It's something that really moves me and really care, and I'll just keep shooting. I'll keep doing it, even though I have plenty. I don't need more. And it really became apparent with him. I know this is with other people or musicians in my collection, my archive. It's like I have hundreds of pictures of him everywhere that we went. It was like, okay, what can I do? Oh, Jeremiah. And he's also an incredible photographer. So he does pictures of me, taking pictures of him. And arguably his pictures are like literally better than my pictures. Most people don't know that. So all of a sudden, he dies, and I'm like, I got to get some pictures of him. I start going through my archive, and I'm like, oh my. If I was like an outsider and I didn't know me and I looked at this, it's like, what's wrong with this person? Why do you have like literally hundreds of pictures of this guy? He's not your kid or your mom, your dad. But anyway, so yeah, but and then I tried, it's overwhelming. So I'm trying to at least share them with the family, and it's very personal and to a lot of people, and it means a lot, and it keeps that person, their essence, or at least in that moment, alive. So in that way, it's a good thing, and it's like you can hear that person. And the incredible thing about him is his whole life was just about creativity, and he was kind of always around photographers and artists and musicians. So there is so many other photos of him from other photographers that are incredible and capture a different moment that I wasn't there for, and I met a couple of them. James Joyner, he does a lot, or he does what I used to do with Miles Mouse, and he was with him a lot. And this Robin, who manages Miles, she's a photographer as well, and they did a lot of stuff. So they've got these incredible photographs of him that I don't have, but they have, and I can look at those, and they can look at mine, and it's like kind of creates this incredible thing. And other people that were with Jeremiah, before, his other friends are photographers, and,
Hmm.
so that is really cool. And that was kind of special, but it is very special that other people who pass away, I feel fortunate that I experienced around them, and if I've got a photograph of them and I'm happy with it, and I know that I hope that maybe they are happy with it, it's there, and yeah. And that was Steve Albini recently, and just realizing how much, at the time you don't think about this work, but when someone passes away, if they were close to you or not, or if they meant something to you in some way, all those moments and experiences come like up in your head immediately. And then it's like the photograph, the moment, and there it is. And that's it, So
Hmm.
it's kind of rambling, but I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. It does. You mentioned your books, focusing on instruments and on like Mars guitars. I believe your first book was Silent Pictures, right?
Yeah.
I was looking through it again, preparing for this interview, and remembered a lot of the images that were in there of a lot of your very most well known or shared images of DC punk bands back in the day, whether Fugazi, Bikini Kill, then there's not all DC bands, of course, like
Mhm.
L7. There's that image that's pretty iconic. That's all in there. Anything you want to say about that would be awesome. But one thing that really caught my attention, I'd forgotten there was this awesome portrait of Andre 3000 from Outkast in there, which I just wanted to hear
Yeah.
about that. How did that come about? What was he like at that time?
Yeah, that was cool. That was early on. So this is the great thing about, as a photographer, I never set out to like earn money at photography. I probably should have, maybe in the scheme of things, but basically, you do work that you love, you're seen doing it, and other people want you to do it. But so long story short, I was doing other work for their magazines, and I was doing work for skateboard magazines, and there was a magazine called Stance that was a brief magazine, but it basically was found there was people from Trans World magazine, skateboard magazine that worked there, and other magazines. It was like a kind of culture, skateboard culture magazine, it was called. And so I was getting cool assignments to like, yeah, Kevin Imamura, who is the head editor there or whatever at the time. He helped with like skateboarding shoes now, which is awesome. He's like, yeah, I want you to photograph Outcast. They're opening for Lauryn Hill in DC. And at the time, I didn't really know Outcast. It was it was pre-internet. I couldn't just quickly look it up. And then I told a couple people, I may have told you, or like I can't remember. But the people who I told, they're like, "What? Oh my God, I can't believe you're going." I was like, "Yeah, I guess I heard a little bit, you know." So I'm like, do the photo Outcast, and I go to like the Constitution Hall or whatever it is, and I go back there and go to the backstage or go to the behind the place. Like, no, you can't get in. I don't know who are you. You know, I was like, well, I'm on this list, and someone's like, no, you aren't. Maybe you are. I don't know. And then finally, somehow, I convinced them. I'm like, I just need like 5 minutes. What's the deal? You know, like, okay, come on in. So they brought me in there backstage, in their dressing room to do some photos, and they were just hanging out. I just had my little, at the time, I was also shooting I was really into, like, I got myself caught up in the 90s, early, 90s trend of cross processing, which is you shoot slide film and then you develop it in negative film and then you get a really saturated, dense color if you do it right. So I'm gonna go back, cross process, shoot with a fast 50 millimeter lens. Should be cool, whatever. So I got back there and they were just hanging out backstage and that was classic, the lights and the mirrors, and Andre 3000 had his tiger suit on and Big Boy was busy playing Tetris on Game Boy. And I said, yeah, just chill out. And then we just started taking some photos and then they were great though. They were just, and they started to pull the, hand moves and everything, just snapping away. And I also photographed them with my half frame camera. So I wanted to do the double frame. So I shot them with this 1960s Olympus Pen FT half frame and both cross process, but cross process in a way that they were clear. And then so I had to get those developed and print those myself. And they ran in, I think, Stance magazine or whatever. Yeah, that magazine at the time. And I just like the photos in general. And then as time went on, when this happens, it's really great when you photograph a musician or a person or someone that you didn't know that much about. You photograph them and then you realize, actually, I really like this music. I really like this person. I can't believe I got to photograph them and they're really cool. It's rare. But
Yeah.
that was the case. So as time went on, then they got all the like their kind of hit songs, and I really liked them. I could see, oh, this is why everyone likes them. Oh my God, I can't believe I got to go and shoot these. It was like after the fact, but it probably better in that way because I went into it less kind of starstruck and less expecting something. Eventually, Big Boy was into Modest Mouse years later, and they worked together at some point, I guess, or something too. But anyways, yeah, that's how that happened, and it was just kind of a fluke, and yeah, it worked out well. Yeah, they were great. They were nice, and again, it pulls up a time, especially with if you look into these clothes, you can see in the photos, you can see Big Boy playing the Game Boy, which is kind of vintage and hilarious now. Yeah.
Hmm. That's awesome. That's awesome. What are you passionate about photographing today?
Um, a couple things. I'm passionate about like photography in general, but working with, I did an MFA a few years ago, and that was all about, exploring photographic archives and seeing what new material I could make from that. And I'm doing that. I'm trying to do that with my work right now. So I'm not doing new work with this work, but it is new because it's like, it is a process of seeing the work. So there's that on that level. And then just to continue documenting my scene, what's around me, what I think is important, or what strikes me, what I'm looking at. And it's not necessarily some of these things are projects or they're not projects, but I guess if I was to say one broad sweeping cliche thing about what I'm passionate photographing now. It's just, I guess it would be, exploring the light and continuing to be very observant of how light falls on objects, on people, places, scenarios, and what I can see with that. And I will honestly, I will use whatever camera I have with me. Most of the time, it's my phone, an iPhone, which I'm passionate about, applying the manual techniques or my knowledge of photography and light into that phone and sharing those with other people, how they can use it and working with other things. So, yeah, there isn't one particular thing that I haven't, at the moment, I don't have one thing that has an endpoint that's like, oh, this series. The last large project I worked on, this is also ongoing, was the Johnny Marr book, The Mars Guitars. And he himself, within what I'm passionate about with like him as a musician, which he falls in this, within my work, there are certain people and musicians that as we all go through life, and when I'm with them or when they're doing something, I will document them. I'll photograph them because they inspired me and they continue to. And these bodies of work build up over time. So my idea is to section these things off and do something with them. So eventually I'll do a book that is, my era with Johnny Marr. And he wants to do that, which would be cool. Hopefully it'll happen. I trust him because if he says he's going to do something, he does it. And there's many things within my work that I will do. I'm aiming to do the same thing with, such as, why would one person see the band Fugazi over 30 times and not go on tour with them and have that many sets of photographs? Like, I have a lot of photographs of different musicians that I'm thinking I'm going to do things with. So it's a lot. It's mostly like, as in projects and collections and things, it's at the moment I'm working through what I've got already. As the process of photography, I'm doing that every day, constantly. It could be, working through my personal experiences of dealing with elderly parents or kids I have or pets or the landscape changing, so.
Yeah. I'm going to ask maybe one more substantive question and then start to wrap it up. But, one thing that we've talked about is, even when we weren't in touch that much, you would message me occasionally like, hey, one of your photos was page, for punk rock photos with it. They didn't give you credit. Did you see this? And I think that's got to be something that happens to you a lot, where your photos show up on random Instagram pages or other places on social media without attribution. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? Why does that matter to you? What, if so, why?
Yeah, no, it's I have a lot of thoughts on that. Yeah, it definitely matters. Early on, this is something I first started experiencing this type of thing way back when I first started, and it's frustrating not to get credit for work that you're doing. And if you're not aggressive about, you can, depending on how you deal with it, is really reflective of the person and all of that. It's quickly, so for example, if a photographer who I love his work and he does incredible things, Glenn Friedman, if his photographs were used without consent or something kind of weird like that, he'd sue those people or get on them. I need to be more like that, but and I didn't that much. So Cynthia Connolly made me cards. My first photo card was a letterpress card made by Cynthia, and the card said photo credit, Pat Graham, with my information, like, give me photo credit. So it's really important, but I know you can't always get photo credit, and it doesn't happen on purpose a lot of the times. And one has to just consider the usage and what is happening or how it's being used. You could spend your whole life like chasing down these things and figuring out what it is. I guess the most important thing about it, and I still feel this way, this is early on, especially I learned because early in my work with the photographs of Riot Girl, there's a lot of controversy around Riot Girl, a lot of media information, and I respected the fact that I even had access to photograph some of Riot Girl activities. And the point was that I didn't want my photos to be used in a way that were not positive or not not approved or not used in a negative way that the person in the photo would not approve of or I wouldn't approve of or yeah, so not in a negative light, like twisted around, something you can't really control. That's one thing. The other thing is if the photograph is being used in a way that is someone else is actually earning money from it and you're not, that is wrong. And that's really difficult now because it's happening to musicians and artists. All of the creativity people create and do is being funneled off to whoever and the owner of the platform as opposed to the content creator. And that's stuff. It's like it's an ongoing thing, and people don't realize that because we're in this day and age. Us old guys or people, it's like nothing. The thing that you think is free is not free. It's just not. And you dedicate your life to something, and it's not necessarily like money is not important. I mean, it is important, but it's difficult. You have to get what you should get or what other people are getting. And there's another thing that I just hate to deal with, but I gotta deal with. It's like copyright, photographs to put it when you make a photograph, take a photograph, whatever it is you receive, you get automatic copyright, at least in the United States. It's copyright. Everyone's like, oh yeah, don't worry about the copyright. That's fine. However, if someone uses that photo, you can, try to make a claim and deal with this, that, and the other thing. If it goes that far, you can get the money back or you can get something, but there is a limit to how much money you can get or how much you deserve. So if you go in and you copyright your photo officially, which you can do for a fee and file a bunch of paperwork and this, that, and the other thing, like in the United States, you could sue for millions or whatever, and maybe you deserve it. Maybe, that's how things are. It's like, athletes get paid millions. It's because people are making millions off of their talent, So anyway, so that's a whole other thing. So I think it's important people should be aware of it. And it just comes down to really thinking about your content and just, what you're putting out there. And yeah, my photographs get seen, get used. A lot of this particular ones are all over the place. And I'll check occasionally, and there's things becoming more advanced where you can track down if things are being used improperly or against copyright. And you could literally could spend a full-time job doing that and suing people if you want to. But it's important. I think it's just I feel the same, musicians and artists are it's unfortunate and it's a privilege that we were able to create or do those things, and hopefully you're going to be creative about how to carry on and keep doing it. And that's why we see a lot of live performers, because unfortunately musicians, the money that they could make is being shifted to a few people who are controlling things. I don't know. I find it frustrating, but you also, with that frustration, one needs to be aware of this. You can't just blindly fumble off. You can, but wake up one day and realize your photo's on a t-shirt and it's all over the place, So, I know that you're seeing this more now because there's photographs that you have of early DC, especially, Bikini Kill and all of that. And it gets put everywhere. And in that way, there's one way, I support that because that was the point of when we were taking these photographs, we wanted to inspire people. So on one level, I see people making zines or collages or something, or my photos on their wall. People have told me, yeah, I had your photo on my wall, or someone had a tattoo of photos I've taken.
Wow.
That's cool, because that's why I did it. But if it's someone making a YouTube video that's got 10 million hits and they're now cashing in because they took a still frame of my image and then they've uploaded that combined with a bootleg version of the band's music, that really kind of pisses me off because not only are they ripping me off, they're ripping the band off. I know they don't mean to, and they love the band, they love the photograph, they love the music, But I have
Hmm.
to gently point that out that, maybe the band doesn't want this photograph representing them, and maybe they don't want you putting their music up and they're not earning from it, when they're the artist. So that's that gets me really, that kind of annoys me. I put that on my thing because there's people take my photos and stick them up on YouTube, and this is like, I don't know. I've charged people. I'm able to do that now. One is if I wanted to, you can do that, but it takes time. So
A quick follow-up on that is you mentioned your images showing up on t-shirts. I think I saw one of your Bikini Kill images is on what I assume is an authorized shirt, right? Very recently as a fundraiser. Do you want to
yeah,
talk about
yeah.
that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, look, that kind of relates to this whole copyright thing and respecting the musicians. So, early on when I took photographs of Bikini Kill and Riot Girl and just the DC music scene, I'd given the photographs to Bikini Kill, and they'd used one on their first EP. And we always, there have been times when people got my photos without my permission, and they'd written articles about Bikini Kill I didn't like or the band didn't like, so I would make a point. Anyways, over the years, we've, at least myself and Kathleen and members of Bikini Kill, if they wanted, we kept in touch. Kathleen would send people to me for like, oh, we need a photograph at this time or whatever. And I'm like, great, and I would, do prints, and they were cool with that or appeared to be cool with that. And so Kathleen's got she has a new book that came out that's really great, actually. I really highly recommend it. Really, really good. Got a photograph in there, and she wanted photographs, or so I shared loads of photos, or like photographs I had of her at the time. And she also has a t-shirt company called Tees for Togo, Tees for Togo, I think. You can put the link in the show notes or whatever. But it's she does a t-shirt company that all the money from the t-shirts go to helping educate girls in a part of Africa. I don't know the specifics, but she's raised a lot of money through that. And there's been t-shirts there was one t-shirt, this iconic picture of Dee from Fugazi, and then there's other different iconic like Bikini Kill shirts or other musicians, artists doing t-shirts like Steve Dorr did some t-shirts. And I told her in the past, if you ever want to use my photo for a t-shirt, I'd love to contribute to that because at some point I want to make t-shirts myself, but I have to talk with the musicians. And so she loved this. There was a photo I have of her, and I guess that she really liked it. So they asked to make a t-shirt of that, and I was super happy to be a part of that and say yes, make a t-shirt of that, and they did. And that's you can order that through them. She's on tour doing interviews and promoting the book, and the t-shirt is along with kind of that collection of the book is called Rebel Girl, and it goes along with that collection, and that's us is a benefit. So it's really cool, and it's just a full shot of this photograph. It's great. And the other cool thing about it, which is she did three shirts on the three. So there's another photograph of her like singing, and that photograph is taken by Charles Peterson, who I mentioned earlier, who is very important in documenting the grunge scene of Seattle. Many iconic photos of all the bands and Nirvana and Mudhoney and all of that. And for me, he was a huge inspiration in capturing the essence of the music with the slow drag, the blur. And so there's a photograph that he took of Kathleen that's on another shirt. And then there's another shirt. It's like a collage of a photograph that photograph he took and my photograph of Kathleen. And that's like awesome. I'm so happy about that. I haven't said anything about that because people are sick of this thing. It's like self-promotion. It's, you want to promote something, but you don't want to like shove it down people's throat. But I was really happy. My kind of collaboration with Charles Peterson, a photograph he took and I took on one shirt, which is, it's of Bikini Kill, a band that is, Kathleen, the band, to me is very important. And initially when I saw them, I sensed that and knew that. And that's why I took photos of them. I'm happy that they're still going on. So,
And that's an example where you can have your photos used that is going to where any revenue generated is going to go to something you support, as opposed to some random person who's monetized their YouTube account or just the platforms themselves, whether it's Instagram
yeah,
or Spotify, in the case of
exactly.
artists, Spotify, where they're making a ton of money and artists are
Mm.
just forgotten, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's typical because like, I'm not against I have Spotify. I need to get rid of it, but it's just like it's a good platform. I can be exposed to things. But on the same point, it's like I shouldn't, I can't support Spotify, support the musicians. And we all, I would, in the ideal dream world, I would, anything I did would be used to support something good. But, we all have to earn income, earn something for where we are. And that's just the system we're in, unfortunately. So, yeah, I have to do what I can do with what I got. So, yeah, it's going to be a benefit. But, the things that I make that are benefiting me, but I can't do anything about it. So that's it. You know?
Yeah, well, why don't we just start wrapping up with, is there anything else you'd want to touch on that we didn't talk about yet?
No, I mean, there's a lot that we could talk about, but I think, no, I'm happy with what we talked about because as time goes by, we all learn about, the things, our own experiences, and I can say confidently I know about photography. Yes, I guess the last thing I would say is that, the political aspect of all of this is which kind of brought us together as friends 30 whatever years ago it was the politics and the music and the art and this combination to me is crucial. It's what moves, and as time goes by it's getting harder and harder to live without becoming overwhelmed with anger and despair. At least I'm finding that with a situation, with things happening, everything colliding, and things that many of us thought have been thinking about for years, and it just keeps happening. And I guess all I can say is that I try to be critical about it. I try to understand the various sides, but I also need to making a point, a stance. And I guess the last thing I'd say about it is that, like I've got some followers on Instagram. They're mostly probably bots, but I've got some followers. And, I will make statements and I will say what things I feel about. And maybe people disagree. And if they do, I'm always, I'm open to hearing, constructive reasonings why I should change my ideas or whatever. But I think it's should remain that way. It should be that way. I guess I'm feeling quite frustrated with the current, like especially this thing going on in Gaza, and I don't even know what to do anymore besides talk to other people about it. And I think we all should keep talking about it and making a point of understanding history in the context of why things are happening, and maybe we can help change something, right?
I agree. Absolutely. That seems like a pretty good note to wrap up on. Why don't you just let folks know where they can find you and your work online, and how can people get your books and support you?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I Insta Pat Graham. Get it? Instagram. Graham. I lived in England most of my life now, and I unfortunately can't pronounce my name correctly in England, but I have to spell it all the time. But it's Graham, Pat Graham. You can get that's my Instagram. At the moment, most of my Instagram is some curated ideas of things that I follow, but a lot of my back catalog, things that inspire me, different things there. I've got a website. If you look me up, you'll see a website, and I do have some books. Most of my books are out of print. The Mars guitar book, which is really Johnny's book, but I've taken about 90% of the photographs in it. That's readily available. Highly recommend that. It's a really good book. And yeah, just keep in touch with me through the Instagram, and eventually, hopefully, I'll figure out other like TikTok and all of that. And I've got projects coming up I'm working on. I'm working on another book that will be kind of an updated version of the Silent Pictures book, which is out of print, but it's easy to find, and you can find it really cheap. It was a first photography book on Akashic for them and for me, learning curve on both levels. So it's good. But anyways, I have another book. I'm hopefully will be out within the next year and a half. Some people have pre-ordered. They will probably want to come after me because I haven't sent them that book yet, but I don't forget. I haven't forgot. It's going to happen if you're one of those people. I do apologize. And there will be another pre-order announcement at some point when I'm actually truly ready. But I'm dealing with thousands of negatives, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. So that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for generously giving your time for this interview, and I appreciate it.
No, thank you. I'm really excited to be asked to be on your podcast and love the work that you're doing and the projects and the series and the portraits, and I'm all for it. And if people haven't checked out your work, they definitely should.
You can support Red Lens Podcast by supporting my Patreon. Go to patreon.com/SiegelPhotos, SIGALPHOTOS, and sign up for a small monthly donation. That will go a long way in helping sustain the podcast and my work as a political photographer. Thank you for checking out and supporting Red Lens Podcast.